It's an interesting idea, that idea of stopping and stepping back. And look, as someone who's sort of got perspective as one of my higher character strengths, it's something that I recognise the value in this situation. But in saying that, when you're angry, I suppose the nature of anger is that it's such an intense emotion that it's so hard to do that at the time. And part of what anger does is it makes it harder to stop and step back from things for a little while. So what are some ways of managing the emotional side of anger? How can we get our arousal down in order to be able to stop and step back?
Right, good point. This is where we get down to the tin tacks of strategies for dealing with anger. And one of the things is we need to be ready ahead of time. I think, like you're saying, when we feel very angry, we can be getting caught up in that sort of fight-flight kind of reaction. You know, we're like a reptile. We're acting on that basic reptilian brain fight-flight. There can be a triggering of that in some situations. So especially where people have a repetitive difficulty with anger, or especially where people have repeated problems with anger, then it's knowing ahead of time to be wary of that reaction coming up quickly and then acting too impulsively. And so basically what that means is for people to tap into their cues of when they're getting angry at first, their physical sensations and cues. Is it a feeling of tightness in the jaw, or is starting to clench the fists, or is it that one's breathing starts to go quicker, or feeling something in your stomach, or just is it some kind of negative thought popping into your mind? So picking up the early signs and signals of arousal, and especially anger-related arousal. So we sometimes think of that as a temperature gauge, and we often ask people on a 0 to 10 scale, how angry do you feel right at the moment? And then to associate that with certain kind of feelings, tightness in the stomach, clenched fists, clenched jaw, something like that. So the person can calibrate their reactions a bit and pick up on it. And also pick up on the kind of settings. Be aware of the kind of settings or situations where they're more likely to feel angry in the first place. So by people being aware of what reactions might tend to come up and the settings that might trigger that, then looking to be ready ahead of time to slow down. Like you said, look to bring down your arousal level. Maybe take a few deep breaths. Pause. Take a few deep breaths. If anger's building up quickly, often it helps early on to leave a situation. You can always come back to it soon afterwards. And that's an early step of getting a little bit more control if people are losing their temper, even to think to, look, go to another room or something for time out initially. But some kind of picking up arousal, being able to lower our tension. And then we'll talk more in the detail of this, but some kind of self-talk. Having some kind of mantra or self-talk really helps, such as the person being able to say to themselves, it's not worth it. Take it easy. Just breathe. And in a situation of trying to deal with conflict with someone, maybe thinking, what is it I want to say? And we can talk about some other techniques for dealing with conflict shortly that can help as well. But really it's about picking up that arousal, having some way of taking a pause and stepping back, not just reacting, not just going into fight or flight, and then looking to temper our reaction. And then that tends to buy us a little bit of time, even a second or two, that then we can choose how we react after that. Actually, I might mention on that, when people followed through an anger management program for 4 months plus and made changes, the biggest change they had is most people after 4 months could say, okay, now rather than reacting immediately, right on the spot, now I've got about 1 second to make a choice in how I respond. And 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to act aggressively. You know, like I'm going to basically choose some other way because I don't like that feeling of losing control and the loss that comes from it.
Are those principles similar then if you're dealing with someone who is angry, in the sense of if you can then build in that pause for them, if you can find ways of bringing their arousal down whilst not bringing yours up at the same time, how do we, I suppose, bring down someone else's arousal level?
That's a very good point, because partners in a particular situation might look at how they respond here. And first of all, it really helps if people can keep their own arousal level down a bit and even look to disengage from the situation if possible. Certainly any way of helping it not escalate. But generally, well, there are 2 main patterns that come up when people might act forcefully and aggressively. One is when someone feels under threat. It's like a fight or flight reaction under threat. Then, if we can keep our own gestures fairly passive and keep ourselves calm, whilst maybe getting across an assertive message like, let's just leave it for the moment. This might not be the time to talk about this. I'll be happy to talk about it later on, but let's just leave it for the moment. Something like that, but looking to calm the situation, passive gestures, maybe showing palms, something like that. But if someone's being very forceful, like being a bully, then often it takes some level of confrontation with that person. Now, it's picking the time, but if someone's repeatedly being a bully, say in a work situation, then it might call for a senior person or a number of people saying to that person, look, your behaviour is interfering with our teamwork. Or when you have done such and such, then that's led to this kind of problem. So sometimes people need some kind of forceful confrontation if they're repeatedly being a bully. But in, say, a family situation, one of the things that we would look to do is find a time where we could convey to that family member some of how it's having an impact on us, how we're feeling hurt, how it's interfering with the relationship, to help the person see that not just you as a partner losing out by that, your relationship is losing out, they'll be losing out as well, looking for another way of dealing with things and communicating with each other, another way of dealing with conflict other than forceful or aggressive behaviour.